If you see one in the sky, if you see one manifest before your very eyes, if you see a strange creature lurking outside, then tell it on accounts of the paranormal. Hear it on accounts of the paranormal. Welcome to accounts of the paranormal.
Welcome to the show. Tonight I am pleased to bring you GRP Media founder and owner Bill Powers, who at the age of 4 was touched with an ability that sparked a lifelong journey of discovery and investigation into the paranormal. Bill, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
I am so excited to have you. You have such a story to tell and so much to tell. I know your story. We were chatting last week. This all started when you were very young, around 4 or 5. And that's kind of where I want to start with you, if you don't mind. Go back to the beginning when this all started. Just tell us what happened and what you've been experiencing.
Okay, my first experience that I had with the paranormal, I was roughly around, I'll say about 4.5 years old. And I grew up in a very small town in New York. My hometown's roughly about 5,000 people. And so it's pretty small by today's standards. And I can remember I grew up in a Victorian home. It was my grandparents lived on the first floor. I grew up on the second floor. And I remember waking up on one particular night, and I kind of sat up in bed and was like trying to get comfortable, and I laid on my right hand side and just trying to get in that position to fall back asleep. And I can remember I wasn't asleep, but I remember clear as day hearing a male voice call out and say, "Billy." And I immediately opened my eyes and I was like, what the hell's that? And I sat up out of bed and I started walking through my house, and my house wasn't obviously huge. It was like leaving my bedroom, going into the dining room. And the minute I hit the dining room, with whatever spirit was there that called out to me, my body reacted to it. And I never forgot that feeling that I had. So as I walked, and I was kind of like looking around, seeing like if maybe it was my parent, what exactly was going on. So I walked through my dining room and I made it to obviously my living room. And right around the corner from my living room was my parents' bedroom. Walked in the bedroom and I kind of like peeked around the corner. My dad was asleep, he was snoring, and my mom was like asleep on her left-hand side. And as like, I didn't think anything of it at the time. So I turned around, started walking back out, and the feeling that I was getting kicked in. And it was not until I probably hit my dining room that I can remember, I guess you could say I freaked out a little bit. It was like, well, what the hell is this? And I ran back to my bedroom and pulled the covers up over my head, and I like tucked them all in because I'm like, well, I don't know what it is. It's the boogeyman. And I fell asleep. I never told my parents about it whatsoever, but it was pretty much from then on I started getting regular occurrences. I started hearing spirit. I started feeling. And growing up was trying to think of the word that I want to use. It was difficult in that I knew that I was different, and I say a lot that I felt special in some way, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And it was not until I was probably in my teens that I realized that what it truly was, other than that I could hear something that wasn't in front of me. And that's when I realized that I was clairaudient and claircognizant, but I'm also an intuitive. It was very unique growing up, especially being a child of the 80s and early 90s. And the paranormal was known, but it wasn't known like it is in today's age. And I don't want to say that I was afraid, but I did not tell anybody that I could hear spirit and that I could feel energy and that I could tell where the energy was coming from. And for about 12 years, I didn't say anything to any of my friends until one day I told one of my best friends about it, and he didn't believe me at first. And I, I was like, I can prove it. And it's like, I mean, I gave him examples from different classes that we did when would be in school. And it'd be like, well, when we were in, like, for example, history class, I mean, I've heard, uh, can you hear me? Can you see me? I need help. Why are you not talking to me? And these are just some of the things that I've heard while sitting in class, and it took the longest time for me to be able to tune it out and to block it so I could concentrate while I was in school. And I mean, still to this day, I can still hear spirit, and I've learned to rein it in. I've learned to control it and to focus it, and it's very interesting and very unique to be somewhere and you hear somebody talking in your ear, and obviously nobody else sees them, but you're trying to pay attention to a conversation and you have two conversations going on at once, one in front of you and one in your ear, and obviously you can't turn your head to the side to answer your guest who's not in a physical form.
When you hear these voices, are you physically hearing them? Is it as if there's a person present? Is it you're hearing it with your ears, or is it kind of in
Yes.
your mind?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that was probably the earliest that I can remember was about 4.5. And I'm sure there was other instances after that time frame. And it's like, I can remember I was roughly around 7 years old. So probably about 2.5 years later, I was about 7 years old. One of my grandparents passed, my grandfather, and they actually lived about a mile from my current house. And I used to love going to their house and walking around. It's kind of like being like the nosy kid and like walking through like all the floors and like hanging out in my grandparents' home where like mom grew up and stuff. But my mom would leave me there with my grandmother, and so that way my mom could either grocery shop, go to work, or do whatever. And I can remember after my grandfather passed, I would be at her house, and she would leave me alone for periods of time, and it could be to like read a book or write or take a nap or like whatever I was doing. But I used to get up and I would like walk around the house to different and peek and snoop. And I can remember many times that I would like go up to the second level, and there was multiple bedrooms that were up there. And I can remember the minute that I would hit the stairs to start walking upstairs, the feeling that I would get would kick in. And it's hard to describe as to like how it felt, other than it was like a vibration in your body, almost like a static electricity type of feeling. And I knew it was there, and I've learned over time that the stronger the feeling it is, the closer I am to whatever the energy is, whatever the spirit is. But at the time, it was very strong. And I can remember going through different bedrooms. It would creep me out. So I would like run down like the back stairway to the back portion of the house, and I'd like come in like the back door. And my grandma wouldn't yell at me or anything, but she'd be like, "Why are you upstairs?" And I'm like, "Well, I was like looking for something." And so we'd like sit back down, do something. So I'd like go exploring like all the time. But like it didn't matter if I was in the basement or the first floor or even the second floor. I always had that feeling. And my grandfather passed away at home. So it was not until I got older in life that I realized that, and I really do truly believe that it was his spirit that was actually still there at the time. And I mean, their house bordered the Erie Canal, which I don't know about you, but I remember growing up from history, learning about the Erie Canal, and obviously the Irish and all the other immigrants that dug it by hand, and all the thousands of people that died, and how long it took to actually complete this marvel. But their house was right on the edge of the Erie Canal, and I always wondered as I got older, obviously with there being water in the canal still to this day, that's like water is a conduit. And one of the theories for the paranormal has always been that if there's running water, you're going to have some sort of a paranormal event or paranormal phenomenon. And I would walk around, and just the feeling that I would get, and it creeped me out, but at the same time frame, like now, it kind of excites me because I would love to be able to go back and to feel and to see what is possibly still there.
You said your grandfather passed away. You were 7. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Tell me about your grandmother passing. I know we were communicating last week, or I think we were texting back and forth, and I think that was a little later on.
It was. I was roughly 19, 20 in that age range, and I was a full-time athlete back then, and how can I word it? I guess you could say it still to this day. I'm very regimented. I'm very I like sticking to schedules. I'll get up early, and it's not to say like, hey, I'll be in bed like by like 9 o'clock these days, but back then I was like very strict, and I was very into the sport that I was in at the time. And I got up early one morning, and I went out, did a training session, and my grandmother didn't really drive anymore. So I would tell her that I would pick up the newspapers. So that particular morning, and it was about 9 o'clock, 9:30 or so. So I picked up the newspapers from the convenience store down the street, and I can remember picking them up and getting back to my house. And I can remember my grandparents had an old antique Singer sewing machine that was in their back hallway, and it was an old wooden machine with the push pedal, so that way you could operate the sewing machine inside. And I put the newspapers down, and I rapped a few times in her door and called out. It's like, "Mama, your newspapers are here," and went upstairs. It's like, got food, got cleaned up, all that stuff, and I thought it was weird because I didn't hear anything going on downstairs, and I was like, maybe she's asleep. Maybe she got the newspaper. So I went down to go check on her, and the newspapers were still on the landing, and which was concerning because she was usually up earlier. I would hear her outside, or I'd hear the radio on. It would be some sort of a noise, TV or whatever. And I grabbed a pair of shoes, and I walked around the back portion of our house. And my grandparents had one room in particular that was like their TV room. And I'm fairly tall at like 6'3", and so I could stand up and like tiptoes, and I could like stick my head and I could peek in the window. And I can remember looking in the window, and my grandmother was slumped forward. She was kind of like slumped forward, but to the left. And I didn't think anything about it at the time, but I couldn't hear anything. I didn't hear her like snoring or breathing or anything like that. So I ran back inside and ran upstairs, and I grabbed a butter knife. And I remember my grandfather showing me how to take and to pop the lock on the back door if I ever needed to get inside. So I popped the lock on the back door, and I walked inside and walked over to her TV room, and I touched her shoulder, and obviously she was ice cold. And I remember like taking a step back, and I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I've always been really reserved and really good with my emotions and keeping everything in check. And I remember saying like, "Oh, mama," and I grabbed her cell phone the cordless phone, and I obviously called the police, and they're like, "Well, who is this?" I told them who I was, and they're like, "So how'd you get in the house?" And I'm like, "Well, I popped the lock on the back door because I lived upstairs." And then I called my dad, and I called my mom. And then of course everybody started showing up, but we had the funeral and the whole procession afterwards with obviously distributing a loved one's goods and all that. And several weeks later, my dad asked me if I would be interested at painting her first floor apartment. And at the time I was a poor college kid, and I was like, yeah, sure. And so we went one day and we bought like all the paint and everything. And I can remember one particular morning he gave me the key, and it was pretty much my job to take and to paint every room that was in the place. And I love painting. I have no problem with doing it, but I can remember opening up her back door, and I remember the door, putting the key in the lock, opening the door, and watching the door swing open, obviously to the right. And there was a wall of static electricity right inside the threshold. And I can remember feeling it when I walked inside. And there was a period of time in my teenage years where I really wanted to be normal. I wanted to not hear and not feel what I now know as the intuitive side and feeling energy. And I just wanted to be like some of my friends. And so for a period of time, I shut it off. And as I was saying the other day to one of my friends, we were talking about turning, I don't want to say turning off because you can never truly turn it off, but you can turn it down. And I turned it down, and after everything with my grandmother, with her dying, something switched. And the minute I opened up the door and I felt the static electricity, and it all slowly started coming back to me. And I walked inside, and I started. I went into our dining room, and like the whole usual thing you do with painting, and the drop cloths and putting the tape down. And I can remember explicitly one particular corner that I was kneeling down and I was putting tape down. And I was getting ready to start like the lower edging. And I mean, my grandmother's dining room was fairly large, so it would be a good hour and a half to do one wall at a time. And I learned a lot about painting while doing it, but I was working fast, and I can remember while I was kneeling down, I could feel a cool breeze. I could feel the static electricity start at my ankles, come up my calves, and then gradually work its way up my back and wrap around me. And it was uncomfortable at the time because it was probably one of the first experiences that I had after a portion of time. I'll say a good 3-4 years where I just tuned it way down because I just wanted to be normal, and I was like, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to do anything with it. And I turned it down, and it got eerie. I don't want to say it was awkward because it wasn't awkward, but to feel like you were being watched, to feel this presence that was wrapped around you. And did it feel malevolent or evil? No, it didn't. I felt loved. And over the course while I was painting over the next several days, I'll say a good 4 or 5 days, I can remember that I would turn the radio on, I would sing, I would do any sort of distraction tactic to try to prevent myself from thinking about it. And then one particular time, and I want to say it was in the afternoon, I just started talking, and it just dawned on me, and I was like, well, Mama, is that you? And for the next several days, I just started having conversations with her, and it's like I love you, I miss you, I'm sorry that you died, and I'm sorry that I found you. And I know after the fact, years later, a lot of my relatives were all, you did really good. We don't know if the same situation, if we would have been as calm and poised and as collected as I was. But while I was there over the next several days, I would feel the energy. I would feel it in different rooms, whether it was the living room or even her bedroom or the den. It followed me around the house. And then one day when I actually walked in to paint, the energy was no longer there. And I realized at that point that, and I firmly believe that she crossed over and that she was hanging around to say goodbye, and she wanted to make sure that everything was okay. And if there was one thing that I could go back and do, I would tell myself to start talking to her at the first day. But I know it's unfair, and I can't really put that sort of pressure on myself it's like, well, hey, I should have done this. But it's like, at the time, with everything that was going on, I think I did pretty well.
What an awesome experience. I lost my maternal grandmother when I was 17. The idea that she might have showed up or could have showed up and let me know that she was there with her presence like that, that is absolutely awesome.
It was really cool. And I mean, even my father passed in 2004. And I can remember many times after my grandmother passed, and I mean, where we would talk, and I remember one particular story that he told me, and this was within a week after she died, in the week time frame that I had my experience. And I remember he told me one story where he woke up in the middle of the night, and it's an old Victorian home, so a lot of the old Victorian homes here on the East Coast, obviously they have like huge octopus furnaces, and I mean the ducts would be 8, 9, 10 inches wide, and it was like Spaghetti City in the basement, but the sounds echo, the sounds carry. So my dad woke up one night and he swore to God several times. He's like, I know I heard your grandmother singing in the basement. He got up and he walked down the back stairs and got to the first floor. He opened up the door, turned on the basement light, and he started walking down the stairs. And as soon as he got down into the basement, where his head could see into the basement, all the singing stopped. He said it was eerie, but he knows that it was 100% it was my grandmother. And I think about it all the time because it was the first real time that I felt more than I heard, because I heard absolutely nothing when I was in my grandmother's. It was only feel only. And I think that's what made it a little bit more eerie, in that I couldn't quite figure out what exactly, or who exactly was with me, I should say. And I'm sure if my grandmother spoke and be like, "Hey, Billy, it's me," or with whatever she would have said, "I love you," I'd be like, "Oh, Mama, it's you." But there was nothing. And I think about it all the time. And as I got older and I realized, as I evolved and I worked on improving myself to open myself up more, that it I've learned to concentrate in some ways to try. If I don't hear something, then obviously I'll switch over and like, all right, so what am I feeling? But I say all the time, I'm like, I wish that I heard like a voice or something. It would have been such a unique and very cool experience if I was able to hear my grandmother speak to me from the other side.
You mentioned during your teenage years, and I guess the earlier years, that you turned it off or down, so to speak. Did you have any type of experiences during those years, I guess, where the voices, the audible comes into play? Did you have any kind of experiences during that time when it began around 4 or 5, and then when you were like 18 years old? Anything that stood out that you can recall that really impacted you?
I'm sure there was, because I can remember multiple times where I would be in my childhood home and I would hear from like an investigator side point, and it's like, I guess this would be the best way that I'll describe it. But I would hear taps. I would hear what would sound like a bang or a knock. I would hear a door handle jiggle, and door handle jiggle in particular was really unique. And then I was like, oh, okay. And as I got older, I realized that my house was haunted. But to hear like the taps, or to hear like footsteps, or to hear the voices, I was like, okay, is it? I think back now, and I'm like, well, was it somebody just passing through? And at one time, I used to say that I described it as a friend asked, and I described it as if being in a dark room and you're like a bright light, and everybody else the spirits can see the bright light. So obviously they're coming over to the bright light to talk to you. And I tend to use that particular example a lot when I'll have different people like ask me like different things about it. But it's like, I'm sure that I had experiences. It's just that they were either not impactful enough for me to remember, or they're locked away in the deep portions of my memory that I just can't access them. But there was a period of time where I just wanted to be like some of my friends, and I concentrated solely on that, and I fought with it for years. And I look back on it now and I'm like, you know what, maybe I should have opened myself up more. But I made up for it when I got to my 20s, because I was all into it in learning how to open myself up in meditation and spiritualism, and getting involved any different avenue to try to enhance myself and to learn what makes me truly unique. And the same friend I was talking to the other day about, when we were talking about turning it down, she came out and she said to me, and she already knew that I had abilities, and because she has abilities as well. She's a clairvoyant. She can see the dead. And she's like, but to be able to turn it down and to turn it back up, and it took me time, because once I was able to turn it back up, the feeling that I would get came back right away. But the hearing took a little bit of time. That as I got into my 20s, then I started hearing things again. I'm still here with you. I mean, I was laying in bed one night and I heard, and it was a little kid's voice, and it's like, I'm still here. And it was in my left ear because I know that I was laying on my left hand side, and it was like, okay, I know that that portion has I guess you could say come back.
That is crazy. I can't imagine how I'd react if I heard something like that. A little kid speaking like that. And how did you respond in that case?
I actually sat there with my eyes closed, and I remember thinking in my head, and it was like, well, okay, who exactly are you, and where exactly did you come from? And that was the only time I heard that particular voice in that particular pitch, knowing that it was a little boy. And it's so interesting to I'll hear some, like for example, one voice, and sometimes it'll come back. It might be, for example, 10 minutes later, and I'll hear something again, but it'll be the same tone, the same pitch. And then other times I'll hear one single time, and then I won't hear that voice again. And I don't know if it's I'm not concentrating enough, or perhaps they moved on, they went somewhere else.
How deep has it ever got with the voices? Like, have you ever heard a voice, been able to respond, and have you ever been able to, I guess, find out who this spirit as a person may have been? Has it ever gone anywhere, or do you just kind of hear a statement or two and then that's it?
It would be words. It would be words in like dribs and drabs. For example, it might be two, three, four words, and then I won't hear. I've learned that as I got older, especially for example, and I don't know what it is. I've never been able to truly figure it out. But whenever, I guess you could say that I was in a relaxed state, and I mean, to this, I'm a busybody to this day. I can't sit still more than 20 minutes. It's so hard for me to sit still, and but I found that as when I was sick, obviously I'd be forced to relax. I'd be forced to uh, try to shut my mind off. And I learned that when I was not feeling good, if I was laying on the couch and I didn't have so much going on in my head, and I was able to turn out, I guess you could say, life, the voice is amplified, that I would hear multiple words from multiple different people, and I was able to tune into them with greater accuracy, I guess would be the word that I could use. And it comes and goes when it's like that, where I can fully concentrate and I can totally hear with what they're saying. And then there's other times where I'll hear, for example, I'm still here, which I mean is still a few words, but it comes and goes. And I mean, even for paranormal investigating, I'll have periods where we'll go into a location and I'll hear just a few words, or I'll hear nothing at all, depending on the location. And as I've gotten older, I've always had the opinion that if spirit doesn't want to talk to you, spirit's not going to talk to you. It all depends on, obviously, for the person themselves. It's like, hey, do I really want to speak to them, or am I trying to speak, for example, to another member of my team? And I still have that all the time, where I'll hear a few things and I don't hear anything. And it's one thing I still try to get better with, and I still try to concentrate with. And it's definitely a learning curve. And as I said the other day to someone, I was like, in some ways, I still feel raw. And her response to me was, and she's in her mid-60s, and she said that, she goes, we're always truly learning through life. And you just have to make the most of it every day in order to try to better yourself, and obviously to hone the gifts that you've been given.
That's a great statement for sure. I want to get into the later years. You just mentioned investigating. Let's talk about the investigations and what has happened in those years since, and how you started investigating.
Well, I guess in some ways, I've always been investigating, especially when you're hearing spirit and you're not, and obviously you can't see anything. But I started really getting into it, I'll say late 20s. And what really, how can I word it? I always had an interest in it. I always, obviously, with the feeling in the hearing, but I would be doing other things in my life. And obviously back then it was concentrating on dating my now wife. And going on vacations and doing in work and all in the everyday mundane things that we do in life, get up, go to work, etc. And I I started concentrating it on more around when my dad died in 2004, and it seemed to click then in some ways because my father had a massive coronary, and it was in January of that year. And my dad, more or less, he used to work for New York State, and he came home from work that day. He took one of my dogs and grabbed her and went to like a neighborhood convenience store, picked up a cup of coffee, which was usual routine, and he went to a local cemetery, and, which coincidentally was about 1,000 feet from my parents' house. From everything we've been able to piece together, we know that he got out of the car, zippered up his jacket, and we figure that, and from what I've learned after the fact, he was already gone even before he hit the ground with a massive coronary. So obviously my dad passes, and of course everything that goes on with that, and which that was tragic enough, but it was afterwards, after my father was buried, that it started to truly click in with me, and I started to do investigating. I would go out by myself, and I cemeteries, and I mean cemeteries were probably the first location that I went to, and coincidentally, it's like I would be in certain cemeteries, and I would feel, I would hear, depending where I was around what graves. I can remember one grave in particular with the one particular cemetery that I was at, and I was standing next to a stone. And back then, I was still trying to figure things out and what my style would be and how I was going to do things. And I just kind of explored. But I was standing on one particular stone, and I can remember hearing, "Hey." It's like clear as day. And I turn around and look to the left, and obviously there's nobody there. But I know that it was a male voice, and it was loud. And I was like, well, who's there? Never got a response. And I looked around the cemetery, and it was on kind of a hill, but you could tell if there were other cars that were nearby. And there was no real houses that were within, for example, we'll say several hundred feet. And at first I thought, well, maybe the voice is carried, and trying to debunk it in my head. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure that came from here in the cemetery. And that's how I slowly started to get into it. I would get into it. I started cemeteries, local houses. I grew up being a lover of history. So I would go to the library. So I started researching places around my hometown, local churches. And coincidentally, I'm close to the Saratoga battlefield, which incredibly beautiful, and it's an amazing location, picturesque, so quiet, notoriously haunted, 100% notoriously haunted. And the battlefield's an amazing location, and I still go there occasionally, but that's how I started. I just went to various different locations, and then from there things just kind of slowly started to click. And I investigated solo for about 13, 14 years. And after my wife and I, when we got married, over a period of time, she started getting involved into the investigating. And I took a period of time off around the birth of our daughter in concentrating with her. And after, God, I want to say it's probably about 2 or 3 years, I went right back to it, and I've been pretty much doing it ever since. And the main difference between then and now is once I hit roughly around I'll say the 14-year mark, I started thinking about, I'm like, I've done so many cases over roughly about a 14-year time frame that I want to start sharing on my knowledge. So probably about 5 years ago, I started thinking about it, and I was like, what do I really want to start a group, or do I want to join a group? And I started looking around at various different groups around here, but nothing truly appealed to me. So I decided, I was like, well, hey, I'm just going to go through and create my own group. So I created my own group, and I spent about 6 months trying to think of a name, and then finally I thought of for what our name is, Grim Reaper Paranormal, and it just kind of clicked with me one morning. And I've always had the creative side, which either clicks either late at night or early in the morning, and it clicked early one morning. And so I went with the name, and I kind of went with it. And then from originally it was just my wife and I, and then I brought on one of my really good friends who's a senior investigator who's also a psychic. And it was just the three of us. And then we went from 3 to 8, and then a couple people left. At one point we got up to 10, we went back down to 5, and right now I have 12. And I just actually brought on another psychic yesterday who lives locally and who has decades of experience, not only with the paranormal investigation, but especially from the psychic side. And it works out well because there's others in my group that she's excited to help teach. And because everybody is different with abilities and nobody does things the same. But when I brought her on board, I'm like, I know that there's a lot that I can learn from her, that especially for concentrating and how to shut my mind down so I can concentrate and I can open up more so I can truly hear better.
How do you guys find your cases? How do people get in touch with you to do these investigations? And any evidence, anything that stands out that you've caught so far that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, yes. Well, prior to my group, I have 3 filing cabinets that are filled with old cases that go back, 18 years, 19 years, photos, audio, obviously sheets of paper that I would just use like an old laptop and I would type notes on, or use like a notebook. And I lost count. I know that I was roughly about 746 cases researched, and I still have the list. I haven't added to it in probably about a year, and I know since then we've done like another 30 plus cases. But for locations themselves, it varies. Some locations are recommended. Other ones, I'll actually get an email or even a text message or some sort of a correspondence. And each location is different. And one of the things that I did when I set up Grim Reaper itself is we're on so many different social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, our website. All of them are integrated. So you could be on any particular platform and a message will come through to my phone instantaneously. And I wanted to have that seamless connection so that way I didn't miss any possible leads. I've had people call me up or even send me an email. It's like, hey, my house has activity. I'd be very interested in having you come. Over the last 5 years, we've developed a knack for what I like to call virgin properties, in that they've never been explored by another paranormal investigator, and they've never had a team in there. They've never had pretty much anybody in there. And those are my favorite type of cases. And because it's the unknown, you don't know what is truly in there. I mean, there's a lot of locations around, not only here on the East Coast, but even on the West Coast, where the Winchester Mansion, that incredibly beautiful home that has paranormal activity to it. And a lot of people in a lot of groups know these large locations. But what about the smaller locations, the ones that are truly untapped and unknown as to what sort of paranormal phenomena exists at those locations? Like, so for example, there's one location that we developed that we call the house on Bacon Street. And this particular location is, I'll say about 160, 170-year-old home. And it came from, the family that lived there came from very humble beginnings. It's kind of like a rags to riches story. And they became one of the most prominent families in this one particular town. And they owned the home for about 110 years. And just over time, of course, the family starts to get smaller, they move away, etc. And for now, the home is owned by a non-for-profit. And I reached out to them about the location with what the idea that I had in mind. And the executive director was totally on board with it. And my wife and I, we went through and we did a walkthrough of the place, actually one fall about 3 years ago. And we captured really interesting evidence in an EVP form. And so we did our walkthrough, which is what we usually do for every location. And over the years, I've refined it to, sometimes it'll be myself, sometimes it'll be my wife and I, sometimes I'll bring one of my psychics with me so I can get another individual that can be like, well, hey, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling that there's a child that's sad, etc. And we've evolved over the years with how we do things. But for this particular house, for the house on Bacon Street, I've been there 9 times in the last 2 years. And I've seen a black mist twice. I saw a black mist the first investigation that we were there, and I can remember clear as day standing at what would be there's like a front desk. And no more than 40 feet from it, I was looking at the director, and I turned and looked back down this hallway, which went into the house itself. And I saw a black mist materialize uh, in front of my eyes, and it went from left to right. And it didn't click in my head until it started to move. And then I quickly ran to where it was, I got there, a few seconds. But obviously, by the time I got there, it was gone. And the only thing that I could think of was it either went up the back stairs, which was in the vicinity with where it was, or it went down into the basement. But for this particular location, for examples, for some of the EVPs that we've collected, one of the first investigations that we were there, I heard, I was walking around with a recorder. It's multiple floors. There's 3 floors altogether. On the second floor, there's one room in particular that we call the doll room. The energy that's within this room is so strong, and it's strong, but it's amazing in some ways, if that kind of makes any sense. I remember walking up there, and I was walking through to go put a digital recorder in this particular room, and I put a meter on top of, in this crib, where they have this one doll that is very old. I mean, she's 110, 115 years old. It's a doll that's from Germany. Nobody truly knows the true history of the doll, other than it's very rare to this day, and only a few of them still exist in the world. And I put the equipment down, and we started our investigation, and we finished our investigation, and investigations will last anywhere from between 6 to 8 hours long, depending on the location. Sometimes it's a night investigation, sometimes it's a day investigation. But for this particular time, it was a night investigation. We wrapped up our investigation, and in regards to the EVP, it was probably the next day that we started listening to evidence. And I can remember having headphones on, and I was listening for the digital recorder that I had in this particular crib. And we employ multiple digital recorders that will spread throughout a house. I mean, once we just used 3, and we just brought them around everywhere. To this day, I have 16 that I've purchased over the years between my 2 different rotating teams. And we'll use multiple recorders and let them run in various different rooms. But in reference to this one particular recorder, some of the examples that I can think of off the top of my head, like I was walking, because I can remember clear as day, and I know where exactly I was, because I was in a hallway right outside the doll room. Because I can remember the sound of the floorboards squeaking, and I know the spot in my head visually. As I sit here, I can picture it. And it was a female voice that came through, and it was almost like a singing with how she was talking. And she said, "Don't stop and talk to me. You know you really want to." And then towards the end, it kind of became distorted, and almost as if it was sort of like a warbly, digitized type of voice, as if she worked her way in, she spoke, and she worked her way back out. But some of the other things that I've heard was a male voice that came through. And this one is truly unique because we had, obviously, for paranormal, there's multiple different forms of equipment. And we had cat balls. And I mean, the toy that cats play with, and investigators will use them, and some investigators love them, some absolutely don't like them. In this case, we were trying it out. We were like, let's see if we can get a spirit to light up these cat balls. Ultimately, did they light up? No, they did not, because we didn't catch anything on camera. But the audio was the interesting part, because I turned them all on, and I can remember placing them on the floor. But what the audio captured at some point during the night, there was a response. There was a male voice that came through, and it said, "Sparkly, up." Then there was a pause, and it laughed, and it kind of went, "Ha, ha, 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 ha." And there was another pause, a door slammed, and there was several more words. I don't remember what the other, like 2, 3 words, but it was the weirdest one of the weirdest digital recordings that I've ever had, even more so than the girl. But we know that since we've been there so many times, the place is incredibly haunted. We know there's a little boy that's there that is attached to an object within the building. And we know he dates back to the mid 1900s. And just from questioning that we've asked over multiple investigations, we know he either died of the Spanish flu or tuberculosis. We have an idea which item he is attached to. And the last time we were there, we were doing a special guest investigation. The location itself was doing a fundraiser, and they asked me if I wanted to be involved and would donate time to give an investigation, which I did. And during the course of this investigation, one of the devices that we were using at the time, Timmy's voice came through, and we asked him what his name was. In an earlier investigation, it was like, we're like, "What's your name?" He goes, "Timmy." So I remember it's like, "Hey, Timmy, are you there?" And we were using a portal device to communicate with him, and he said, "Yep." And I guess it depends on the device. Sometimes we'll get him, other times we'll get a voice, and then we'll get another voice come through. So in this particular case, he said yes, and like, "Timmy, is anybody there with you?" And a female voice came through and said it almost as like he was being corrected or something. It was a female voice and was like, "Timmy," and he got quiet for a little bit, and then, but he did come back. But we've been able to tie him to one particular object, or at least we believe we've tied him to one particular object. But he came through during this special investigation, and he said, "I miss home." And in real time, it was not caught with my ears. It was not until I listened on the digital recorder that I caught it, which is one of the reasons why we use so many. Because so much information is spit out in such a short period of time, it's impossible to hear everything that comes through. And this is just one location. And for a few minutes ago, when I referenced for the Saratoga battlefield, I've heard phantom gunshots, phantom cannon fire, obviously the voice aspect. I've heard, "Hey, you can hear me." It's like, "I can see you." I've done EVPs in the battlefield, and I've had British soldiers be standing next to me, and I know it was a British soldier because I know right where I was standing in a field that would be for the Battle of Bemis Heights, and I heard a British accent say, "Hurry up," asking my question because I was tongue twisting it at the time when I couldn't spit the words out. And I remember asking my question, and I remember saying, it's like, "You're a real smartass for saying that." But of course, from the paranormal side, and it's easy for me to say this, but I'm like, I wish I had a friend or something that was there with me, so I could have told somebody like at the time frame about Saratoga Battlefield, notoriously haunted. I've heard, especially the horse neighs. The horse neighs were the most interesting part itself, but there's so much activity at the battlefield, and even for some of the EVPs that we've captured there. I have certain particular photos and certain particular videos that I would love to share, but I know I can't because, of course, it's a violation of the federal law. And I have one video in particular where we were on, there's a trail called the Wilkinson Trail, and I was walking with my cell phone, and I was just using I had a camera mount, and I was walking the trail, and I was doing trigger object sessions, and I was recording while I was walking. And I remember walking up this slight knoll, and I remember it was summertime. I'll say it was roughly around August. It wasn't totally hot outside, but I know it was warm because I was wearing shorts. And I can remember looking up this knoll, and it's a bunch of pine trees, and I could see the sun in the distance, and it was already behind the tree. So I know it was kind of in the afternoon. And I just started walking along, walked up the knoll, but I remember feeling a cold breeze. I didn't hear anything. I had no voices in my head whatsoever. And what drew me to this one particular video clip was like 2-3 days later when I was reviewing all the evidence and I had headphones on. I was watching this one spot, and what drew me to it was I heard the air displacement of the air going past the microphone on my phone and hearing like the whole whoosh noise. And I backed it up and I started slowly playing with that one block of the video, and it's only maybe, we'll say, about a 5-second time frame. And there was trees on both sides of the trail, but I could make out this distorted image that would peek out from the left side of the tree. And as I got closer to it, it came out from behind the tree and came right towards me and right past my phone. And I showed a couple close friends the video, and several that are within the paranormal community. And it's hard because it's distorted and you can't truly make out what it is, other than that there's air displacement. And I know it was not a bug. I know it was not anybody else that was around me. But that particular piece, I absolutely love. But at the same time, the same trail, roughly the same spot. When my daughter was little, because my daughter, she likes doing investigations, and every now and then, and she came with us one time, and we were in roughly the same spot, and we were doing a trigger object session where I had a Bluetooth speaker, and I was playing recorded cannon fire and recorded musket fire. And I would play it for 30 seconds. I'd pause it and be like, do you remember these sounds? And then I would play it again. And then I would stop and I would ask a different question. And it was like, did you fight here at the battlefield? Did you die here in some of these fields? And I'd be like, if so, I do apologize. We're here to speak with you. We're here to communicate with you. And we heard, all three of us heard a gunshot. And it was not until I looked at my wife and I'm like, did you hear that? And she's like, yes. And I looked at my daughter and she shook her head yes. And we all heard it. And I grew up around firearms. And so I know the sound of what a hunting rifle sounds like, a shotgun, 9mm, etc. And it was not any of those. And I started going back to my phone and playing one of the soundtracks that I had on my phone that I was using for a trigger object session. And I'm convinced that it was musket fire.
What a lifetime of paranormal accounts you have, Bill. And I know we can keep going on and on and on. I'm running short on time here. I am going to have you back for a Bill Powers Part 2, if that's okay with you, where we focus
definitely
solely on your investigations and what you have captured in those investigations. We're going to set that up 100%. So thank you so much for being here. I can't thank you enough for joining me, being on the show, and opening yourself up and what you've experienced throughout your life. If you don't mind, if you'd like to tell the listeners where people might be able to reach you or contact you, if you want to provide your socials, your website, go ahead.
Sure. For the best location to find us, obviously, would be for the internet. Our web address is Grim Reaper, GRIM, Reaper, REAPER, paranormal.com. We have a pretty expansive website, which is on there, but if you scroll to the bottom of the screen, there's actually going to be links for Facebook, for TikTok, for Instagram, and that you can connect to all of us. And then the name is always the same on every social media platform for Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok.
Fantastic. Thank you again. I truly appreciate you being here, and we will be doing a Part 2 for sure.
Oh, definitely. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate you being here. You can catch this show wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our website, accountsoftheparanormal.com, where you can access full episodes, as well as links to all our socials and our YouTube channel, where you can listen and watch along with visual images. And if you're a fan of what you heard here, please like, share, follow, subscribe. I appreciate the support. And if you have an account to share and you'd like to be on the show, email me at show@accountsoftheparanormal.com and tell me what you saw. I'll see you next time.